Welcome back to ex4-responsive csc230 class, and this is part 2, and we're going to start doing our styles in our media query so that when we resize this page here, it will adjust and not get covered up. So the first thing we're going to do, I'm going to go back to and again, we're primarily working in our CSS at this point. We don't have much to do with our index.html because remember we took our styles out of there. So we're working primarily on this page, and the first thing was we put in a little body thing. We're going to change our body from absolute of 800 pixels to 100%. Now you could copy some of this stuff or you could just type it in. I'm going to copy it and I'll scroll down here and I'm going to replace this background color because we're not messing with our background color. We're going to leave that alone. Anything that you don't change will stay the same. So you don't have to rewrite any of these. Anything that exists will stay what it is unless you overwrite it. So we're going to overwrite our width right now. Instead of being 800 pixels, it's going to be 100%, and that's going to be our new width. So I'm going to save that, and I'll just take a look at my page and see what happens when I do that. And if I resize it, once it gets to our breakpoint, you can see what happens here. It's starting to resize. It's hard to see, but our border is there, and here's my footer. So it's starting to resize our main page. It's starting to resize our body. The only thing it's not resizing, if I could still scroll over, it's not resizing this because we don't have that set to scale. So that's still full size and it's just getting cut off. And that's okay in a way. We could have it be cut off if we want to. There's different ways to do that. One thing we don't want, actually it doesn't look bad floating even at a smaller point, but we'll adjust that eventually. But we don't want it floating here because you see what happens. It kind of gets all crowded in here. So we want to adjust that so this stacks. So we're going to have to do that. And again, we're going to have to resize our image up here as well. So let's just adjust kind of one thing at a time as we go through this. And the next thing we'll adjust here, other than our body width, because I think everything's okay. I don't think there's anything we have to do with body. We're going to go down to header, and we're going to adjust our header a little bit. And I'm actually going to I'm just going to copy this whole kind of selector and its declaration block here, and I'm going to paste it down here. And I'll paste it right after this one. Remember, keep your closing one here. I'll even move this in so it's underneath. Just try to find a scheme that works here. So I know that these are the opening and closing for the entire query, and these are separate things that are going to happen when it gets resized or when it's below 700. So when it gets below 700 pixels, this is what's going to happen. Now in our header, what's going to happen here, and I'll even tab these in so they look a little nicer. Our height is basically going to change. We're going to do something with our height. Instead of being 280, we're going to do a couple things here. We're going to make height auto. And I'm also going to change a width, and I'm going to put something called max width. It should just be max width, not width. So its max width is going to be 100%. That means it'll get smaller. So we'll put max width in here as a property of 100%. And that's actually just for the header element, not for the header image. So if I save this, just do Control S. I'll save this, and I'll see if that did anything. And I'm guessing probably not. One thing it is happening, I'm getting a little gap there. So I am seeing that. So our image is not resizing, but I have a feeling our header is. So what we're going to do here, and this will just be, I guess, a little quicker. Instead of making separate ones here, I'm going to put a comma. And I'm going to put header image, or just header image. Now remember, when you have the space here, the comma means both header and this one. When you have the space, this means the child of the parent. So this is the image inside header. So we're basically targeting both of these, and we're saying both of their max width is going to be 100%, and both of their height is going to be auto. So let's see what happens by targeting both the image and the container that it's in. So I'll just save it. And now you can see what's happening. Check out the header image up there. You can see it's resizing and it's getting smaller. That's exactly what we want it to do right now. At least that's our intent. You could have it do different things. You could have it get cropped if you want. But that looks good. The only problem is I have that little gap there, and that's one of those little glitchy things that we're going to have to fix. And to fix that little glitchy thing, I'll just fix it the way I have in the past. I'm just going to go here and just put like a negative margin in here. Now this is, again, this is just a little kind of fix thing. So I'm going to go in here and just put margin bottom. And I'm just going to put a little negative margin. I'll just put negative 2%. I'll just put a percent in there. And I'll save it, and I'll see if that fixes it. We could kind of trial and error here, see if it works. And now if I scale it, it looks pretty good. And you could even try less, but I tried it before, and I did higher percentages, but it went down to like 2. I think at 1% I still seen a gap. So that's okay. That fixes that little glitch there. And what you may want to do in here in your code is, fix this gap, just so then you know why you did that, or why you put that code in there. Remember, these are kind of your notes, so you should put as much stuff in here that kind of tells you what's going to happen. Even this, you could even, where it has width 100%, this basically, full size on a device. I guess that's one way of saying it. That it's basically going to fill your screen to one column on a device. So it's not going to be centered anymore. It's just going to be full size when it gets down below 700 pixels. So now we have our header adjusted and our header image adjusted. So I think we've kind of tackled these two things from body and header, and we also have one here for main. So I could even copy this whole main thing here, and I might as well copy float or figure, because we're going to do something with figure as well. So I'll copy both of these and I'll paste them in here. And again, I'll indent this stuff here. Now I'm not going to I'm not going to change anything with that stuff. I am only going to change the padding, so that's all I need there. And I'll get rid of this extra space. And I'll try to keep things tabbed over nice, so everything that looks nice here. So I know it's all inside my media query. And I'll even move this over too, and so everything looks okay. So now we have one for main, and all we're going to do is just change the percentage. So we're just going to make this. Now, what is a percentage? Now you could do math here. You could just say, if you want to, you could open up your calculator and say 20 pixels divided by 800 pixels equals 0.02. It's about 2.5%. So let's say 3%. That's a good way to figure out a percent. I'll say 3% here, and that goes all the way around. So I'll say 3%, and we'll see how that works. And float, we're going to take off. We're moving float, so I'm going to put none. Float none, and that will mean there's no float. Now, I can't just delete this. You have to say, if you want to get rid of a float, because there's a float up here in figure, you can't just like delete it, because it won't know. It'll just keep whatever's default. So it'll keep floating right unless you tell it that you don't want to float. So you have to make sure that you do float none. That removes the float. This removes float. Now we have our percentage, and it should kind of stack this on one column when we do that. So let's save it, and let's take a look at it and see what happens here when we resize. And there it is. Now we have some issues here, because we see that our fig caption is kind of going the full width of our page. And you might say, well, why is it going the full width? If that's not, why is this going the full width of our page? And that's actually because the figure is going the whole width of the page. You might say, well, the figure, no, it's not. It's right there. Well, no, the figure is going the full width. If you had a little box and you could see around the figure would be going around here, but the image is not, because the image is smaller than the figure. The figure right now might be around 400 pixels, but our image is like 300 or something. So we can adjust that, and then that will automatically adjust this part here, because again, what's happening is the fig caption, which is inside figure, is centering in the figure. So our figure is too big right now. So we can adjust that if we want. So let's go back on our CSS and see what we have to do with figure. So we have percentage. Oh, we want to actually, this is the one I wanted to change. I made a mistake here. This should actually be 3%, although there's nothing wrong with what we did here. That's okay too, but this is the one I wanted to change to percent, the main, so that we have that all around, because 20 pics might be a little too big at a smaller size. Even before, I think, let's see if this might have changed already. And let me refresh it. I don't know if I'm going to see that now, but we don't want it 20 pixels at that small size. So we want to make sure that we, the percentage will kind of help it a little bit. So I'll save this, and let me just see if that looks a little different. It may not. So maybe, no, it doesn't really look different. All right, so what we want to do is we have to fix this little part here, which won't be hard to do. And how do we do that? What's the problem? The problem is the figure is the width of the page. Well, we can change that. What could we do? If we know, and we're not going to see anything here, so what I'm looking at is not going to really help. You could maybe try to center the image, Or what you could do, if you look at your index, if you look at your image, now this will change because my Ragnar might be a different size than whatever you used. Mine is 300. My width is 300. So what I could say is, well, what if I just make my max width of my figure 300? It'll make kind of a smaller figure. Let's see what happens here. If we go down here and we go into figure, and now this is only going to happen when it gets less than that. I'm going to make my figure, and I'll just put width for now, and I'll just make it 300 pics because that's the size of my picture. So that's fine. The size of my picture, I don't have to use percentages. I'm going to use that for now, and I'll just save it and see what happens. And now what you're seeing happen is now my figure is 300 pixels and the fig caption is adjusting to that. So that's adjusting to that. So everything looks okay. So we're actually okay. Now the way the line breaks and stuff, we can't really control this up here right now. We could make this centered if we want. We could make the heading, we could make a separate declaration and make this centered if we want, but I think that looks okay. This looks a little odd. I would need a little maybe padding on my footer over here I may want to fix. So let me go and do that. Let's just fix these little things here, but everything looks okay so far. As far as doing that, you know, other than we might want to remove the float a little later, because right now the float's jumping right over there. And, you know, if you're on a, depending what kind of device you're on, you know, you might have too much space over here. You might not like that. So we might want to adjust that, but everything's resizing okay. But I'm just going to change the footer. Now to just change the footer, I could just kind of highlight my footer style here and just paste it down here. And again, I'll tab everything over. I only need one, so I could just get rid of all these. And then I'll tab this over so it kind of, so it aligns up. So all the pairs of curly brackets kind of align up, and then the pairs for my media query are the same, are kind of out a little more so I could recognize them. Now footer, what I'm going to change, I'm just going to do a padding right. And for padding right, I might just do like, I don't know, 3%. That's what I'm using for other stuff. So I'll use 3% there for padding right. Get rid of these extra colons in here because things won't work right. And I'll save it and I'll see how that looks. And I'll just refresh. And now if I resize, I could see, if I have to scroll down here, I could see I have a little more space there. And I have a period after my name for some reason, which I don't really need. And now one other thing I mentioned, and we could do this real quick, if I wanted another media query, I can actually, I'll copy this. It'll be easier than copying the whole thing. I'll put another media query, and I'll do one at maybe 540. I'll try it a little less, and I'll put my closing bracket here. And maybe what I'll do here for figure, I'm actually just going to copy these two things here. And I'll make sure I put them inside here. And I'm just trying this. You don't necessarily have to do this, but I'm doing float none. Instead of doing it at 700, I'm doing it not until it gets to 540. So I'm going to actually get rid of it here for my figure. Here's my figure. I'll get rid of this whole thing. So I'm not going to actually float it until it gets a little bit smaller. And then I'll do the float none. This is a second breakpoint that I'm doing here. And you can see I have a red X here, and that means because I'm probably missing my second curly bracket for this. Because remember, each media query needs its own bracket. So I'm going to make sure I close this here. And I have my pair for figure. So that means at figure, it's going to stop floating at 540 and not at 700. So let's just see if that has any effect. So here we go, here we go. Here's 800. 800 is basically the body width. I'll go in closer, and you can see what's happening. As I go in here, it's getting closer because I haven't stopped the float yet. I haven't stopped the float till I get to about here. So it gets, there's about as far as it gets, and that doesn't look too bad. So I can adjust that a little. If I think that's too close, I can go here and say, well, you know, let's do it at 560. Let's make the max width 560. So I have a little more time before it starts to stop the float, or before it stops the float. So now when I refresh this and I resize this, you can see it'll jump to one column a little bit sooner. So it jumps to one column a little bit sooner, and now it goes to one column. So I don't have as much blank space over here, so that's a little bit better. And that's about what I want for this. So I'm going to save what I have in my code, and this might be a good place to stop. And I think that's all I'm going to need for this. I think we're okay. I think this covers pretty much the bulk of our introduction to responsive. So again, just make sure that you have your separate ex4 CSS file. You made your changes to your index, and I think we're okay. This little thing here is just about the wild card. So I actually put a separate query in here just for the float, and try that out. That may change depending on the size of your image. You may have some people had a bigger image, so you may have to change some things. I know one of them had extra space, like in between this paragraph. Somebody had one that had a bigger image, and they had to put more space in here. So you may have to adjust that. Once it gets to one column, take that space out. You'd have to put basically a style that removes that space or sets it to 0, whatever you had in there for padding. So that's about it. So I think we're good for ex4 responsive. So we're going to stop here, and I'll post the instructions, and then let me know if you have any questions.